The year is 1333, in the old Italian city of Bologna. The world is heavy with shadows. Plague, hunger, and war haunt the land. Yet in the middle of all this fear and struggle, a small light begins to shine. Not the light of kings or warriors, but of a young girl, barely 11 years old, whose pure love for God would leave behind a story so powerful it would echo through the centuries. Her name was Imelda Lambertini. To most, she was just another child in a noble family, one of many children who lived behind stone walls in medieval Italy. But to heaven, she was different. From her earliest years, she showed a love for prayer and for the presence of God so deep, it astonished even the adults around her. While other children played, Imelda could often be found in silence, kneeling in corners of her home, whispering words to the God she already felt so close to. This was not an age where children were considered important in spiritual life. Religion was seen as the work of adults, priests, monks, and nuns. Yet Imelda's innocence gave her a vision of God that was clearer than most grown men could imagine. At only 9 years old, she made a choice that surprised everyone. She left the comforts of her home and entered a Dominican convent. The sisters hesitated at first. She was so young, so fragile. But something in her eyes, something in her heart, made them open the door. It was as if they knew she was already chosen for something far beyond her years. Inside those convent walls, Imelda grew in holiness. She loved the prayers, the singing of psalms, the simple life of sacrifice. But above all, she loved the Eucharist. Each day, when the priest held up the consecrated host, her whole body seemed to tremble. Her eyes shone with longing. She often asked the sisters, "Tell me, how can anyone receive Jesus in Holy Communion and not die?" Her question wasn't childish curiosity. It came from a heart so inflamed with love that she truly believed the human body could not hold such joy without breaking. And in a way, she was right. But there was one problem. In the 14th century, children were not allowed to receive communion until much later in life. The rules of the church were clear. Imelda would have to wait. No matter how much she prayed, no matter how much she begged, the answer was always the same: not yet. What no one knew was that heaven itself was preparing an answer. And when it came, it would change her life forever. To understand the miracle of Blessed Imelda Lambertini, we have to go back to her earliest days. She was born in 1322 in the Italian city of Bologna. Bologna was no ordinary place. It was one of the most important cities of medieval Europe, filled with merchants, nobles, and scholars. Its great university, already centuries old, made it famous throughout Christendom. But for ordinary families, life was not easy. People lived in crowded streets, sickness spread quickly, and danger was never far away. Imelda was born into a noble family. Her parents gave her everything a child could want: fine clothes, good food, a safe home. Yet from the very start, she seemed uninterested in these things. Stories from her childhood describe her as a gentle, quiet, and thoughtful child. While other children laughed and played with toys, Imelda would slip away to find a quiet corner. There, she would fold her small hands together and whisper simple prayers. Her parents at first thought it was just a phase, but it wasn't. As she grew older, her love for prayer only deepened. She seemed to live with one foot already in heaven. Her eyes carried a look of innocence and wisdom far beyond her years, and people who met her often felt a strange sense of peace in her presence. From the time she could speak, she showed a deep devotion to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. Whenever her family attended Mass, she would fix her gaze on the altar with such intensity that even the priest noticed. She didn't fidget like the other children. She didn't grow bored or restless. Instead, she seemed completely absorbed, as though she was seeing something others could not. At that time, the Eucharist was treated with such awe and reverence that ordinary people received communion only a few times a year. For children, it was delayed until they were much older, often until their teenage years. But Imelda's longing for communion was so powerful that her family soon realized she was not like other children. By the age of 9, Imelda asked her parents for something unusual. She wanted to enter the Dominican convent in Bologna. It was a shocking request. She was still so young, barely out of childhood. The convent was a place of silence, prayer, fasting, and sacrifice, hardly the kind of life for a little girl. But Imelda begged so earnestly, with such certainty in her eyes, that her parents agreed. The sisters at the convent were astonished when she arrived. Here was a delicate child with golden hair and bright, innocent eyes, stepping into the stone halls where women gave up everything to serve God. At first, they worried she would not last. Life in the convent was strict. Early morning prayers, long hours of work, no luxury, no play. But Imelda accepted it all with joy. From the first moment, she seemed to belong. She loved rising before dawn to sing the psalms. She loved kneeling for long hours in the chapel, her small lips whispering prayers with a seriousness far beyond her age. She even loved the small sacrifices, eating simple meals, wearing plain clothes, and living without the comforts of her old home. Yet, there was one thing that filled her heart more than anything else: the sight of the Eucharist. Every time the priest raised the host at Mass, Imelda's face lit up. The sisters noticed how her eyes filled with tears and how her body trembled with love. She longed to receive Jesus, not just to see him. One day, she asked the sisters a question that revealed the fire burning in her heart. "Tell me, how is it possible to receive Jesus into one's soul and not die of joy?" The sisters were moved, but also a little troubled. They knew the Church's rule. Imelda was still too young. She had to wait. No matter how much she prayed, no matter how deeply she longed for Jesus, the answer would always be the same. For Imelda, this was a heavy cross to carry. She lived in the convent, so close to the altar, so near to the mystery she loved, and yet she could not receive it. Day after day, she knelt in the chapel, watching the sisters receive communion while she remained behind, her hands folded, her heart aching. But far from giving up, her desire only grew stronger. Every day in the convent brought the same rhythm: morning prayers, work, meals, more prayers, rest. For the other sisters, this life was natural, even peaceful. But for Imelda, each day carried a wound. Each morning she walked into the chapel, saw the candles burning, heard the chanting, and felt her soul swell with love. And yet, when the time for Holy Communion came, she was left behind. Her longing was like a flame that refused to die down, a flame that grew brighter and brighter, until it seemed that something extraordinary had to happen. The year was now 1333. Imelda was just 11 years old. The Feast of the Ascension was drawing near, a day when the Church celebrates Jesus returning to heaven. The convent was preparing for the Mass with flowers, candles, and song. For the sisters, it was a beautiful feast, like many others before it. But for Imelda, it would be the day her prayers were answered. Heaven had heard her longing. And soon, in a way no one expected, the gates of eternity would open for her. The Mass had begun. Among the crowd of white-veiled nuns sat Imelda Lambertini, only 11 years old, her heart pounding as though it would break through her chest. She had lived every moment of her short life for this mystery, and once again she was about to be left behind. The Mass continued. The readings, the psalms, the prayers, each word carried her soul higher and higher. When the priest began the consecration, silence fell across the chapel. The bread and wine were lifted, and with those words, "This is my body, "This is my blood." The simple elements became Jesus himself. Imelda trembled. Tears welled in her eyes. The bells rang softly as the consecrated host was raised above the altar, glowing in the candlelight. For her, it was as though heaven had opened right before her. Yet still, she knew she was too young. The sisters would go forward to receive. She would remain behind. But God had other plans. As the time for communion came, the sisters approached one by one. Imelda stayed in her place, her head bowed low, her small lips whispering prayers. Suddenly, something stirred. A murmur ran through the chapel. The sisters gasped and turned their eyes upward. Above Imelda's head, suspended in the air, was the consecrated host. It shone with a light that seemed not of this world, a gentle radiance that filled the chapel with awe. The host hovered there, glowing, as though carried by unseen hands. The sisters fell to their knees. Some wept openly. Others crossed themselves, whispering prayers of wonder. The priest, shaken and trembling, stepped forward. He saw the host suspended over the child who had longed for it with all her heart. At once, he understood. This was heaven's answer. This was God's own declaration that the child was ready. With reverence and trembling hands, the priest took the host and placed it upon Imelda's tongue. The girl closed her eyes. Her face lit up with a joy so pure, so radiant, that the sisters never forgot it. In that instant, it seemed as though all of heaven had come down into her small body. And then, just as suddenly, her body went still. Imelda collapsed gently to the floor, her hands folded, her lips parted in a soft smile. She had received her first and only communion, and in that same moment, her soul had flown to God. The sisters rushed to her side, but it was too late. Her heart had stopped, but her face bore no trace of pain or fear. Instead, it was filled with peace, as though she had fallen asleep in the arms of her beloved. For a moment, the convent was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. They all knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. A child, denied communion by earthly rules, had been invited by heaven itself. She had longed for Jesus with all her heart, and Jesus had answered not only by coming to her, but by taking her home. Word of the miracle spread quickly beyond the convent walls. The people of Bologna were astonished. An 11-year-old girl, radiant with purity and love, had been chosen by God to remind the world of the mystery and power of the Eucharist. Pilgrims began to come, eager to see where the miracle had taken place. And from that day forward, the name of Imelda Lambertini would be remembered not as a child who was denied, but as a child who was chosen. For a long moment after Imelda fell to the floor, the chapel was filled with silence. The only sound was the faint crackle of the candles and the distant echo of church bells ringing in the city. The sisters stared in disbelief at the small body before them. She looked so peaceful, as if she was simply asleep. But the radiance on her face told them it was something far greater. The priest knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he checked for signs of life. But there was none. Imelda's soul had gone to the one she had loved so fiercely. She had asked, "Can anyone receive Jesus in communion and not die?" Now, in front of them all, she had answered her own question. The sisters wept. Some held each other. Others pressed their rosaries to their lips, whispering prayers of awe and sorrow. They had lived with this child, watched her pray, seen her longing. They knew her heart, and now they had seen her final gift, to leave this world at the very moment she received her beloved. Word spread quickly through Bologna. The story of the miracle raced through the city streets. A little girl has died of love after receiving her first communion. People poured into the convent to see the place where it had happened. Crowds gathered at the gates. Pilgrims from nearby villages hurried to Bologna. and soon the whole region was speaking of the child saint. Her parents, who had once doubted if their daughter could handle convent life, were struck with both grief and pride. They had given their child to God, and God had claimed her in a way no one could have imagined. In the days that followed, the sisters prepared Imelda's body for burial, but they noticed something extraordinary. Her face did not change. Unlike most who die, whose skin grows pale and lifeless, Imelda's face remained soft, peaceful, almost glowing. Her small hands, folded in prayer, seemed untouched by death. For those who saw her, it was as if she was still whispering prayers in the chapel, her soul hovering just beyond the veil of heaven. The funeral mass was unlike anything Bologna had ever seen. Nobles, priests, and ordinary townspeople filled the church. The little coffin was surrounded by flowers, the scent of lilies rising into the air. The priest's voice trembled as he told the story again, how the host had appeared above the child, how the miracle had unfolded before the eyes of the sisters, and how the girl had died with a smile of joy. People wept openly. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others whispered to each other, "She is a saint. She has gone straight to heaven." For the sisters of the convent, life would never be the same. The empty space where Imelda used to kneel reminded them daily of her absence, yet also of her presence. They believed she had not left them at all, but was now closer than ever, interceding for them from heaven. Many of them began to pray to her in their private devotions, asking for her help and guidance. But the story did not remain within Bologna. Pilgrims came from distant towns, carrying the tale of the child who had died of joy at her first communion. The miracle spread across Italy, across Europe, until Imelda's name was spoken in monasteries and churches far beyond her homeland. Her short life had ended, but her story had only begun. After the day of her miraculous First Communion, Imelda Lambertini's story could not be forgotten. For the sisters who lived with her, it was burned into their memories forever. But what truly astonished them was what followed. When her small body was placed in the convent, the sisters noticed something remarkable. Days passed, yet her body showed no sign of decay. Her face remained soft and peaceful, her skin almost glowing, as though she were only asleep. Her lips, which had whispered so many prayers, still seemed ready to speak. This incorruption was seen as another sign from heaven, a confirmation that this little girl truly belonged to God. The people of Bologna soon began to venerate her as a saint. Pilgrims would come to pray near her body, asking for her intercession. Many reported graces, healings, and favors granted through her prayers. The convent, once a quiet home of prayer, became a place of pilgrimage, with Imelda at its heart. Her body was later placed in a beautiful shrine in Bologna, where it can still be seen today. Centuries later, when her remains were examined, her body was found to be astonishingly well preserved. This incorruption became another testimony of her purity and holiness, a visible sign of the miracle of her life. The story of Imelda reached Rome. The Church investigated her life, her miracle, and the devotion that had grown around her. While centuries passed before official recognition, her story never faded. Priests told it to children preparing for First Communion. Parents whispered it to their little ones as a reminder of the holiness found in childlike love. In 1826, Pope Leo XII declared Imelda blessed. He recognized her as a model of purity and Eucharistic devotion. By his authority, the Church gave her feast day to be celebrated on May 13th, a date that beautifully foreshadowed another great Marian apparition centuries later in Fatima, Portugal, also tied to children and Eucharistic devotion. The Pope spoke of her as a shining example of how even the youngest souls can teach the world about love for Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. Though she never grew into adulthood, never preached sermons, never founded a religious order, Her simple witness of love had done more than words ever could. For this reason, the Church honored her with a unique title, the patroness of First Holy Communion. All around the world, children preparing for their first reception of Jesus in the Eucharist were entrusted to her care. Her story continues to inspire them, showing that age is no barrier to holiness. Even today, when pilgrims visit Bologna, they can kneel before her relics. They see not just a little girl who died young, but a soul aflame with love, preserved by God as a living reminder of the power of the Eucharist. Many who kneel there leave in silence, deeply moved, carrying with them a renewed love for Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. More than 600 years have passed since that spring day in 1333. The convent walls have aged, the city around it has changed, but the memory of Blessed Imelda has not dimmed. Her incorrupt body and her radiant story remain a beacon, a call to every generation to approach the Eucharist, not with routine or boredom, but with the burning love of a child. Centuries have passed since Blessed Imelda Lambertini's short life. The world has changed beyond recognition. Empires have risen and fallen. Cities have grown and crumbled. Science and technology have transformed daily life. And yet, her story continues to shine with the same power it held in 1333. Why? Because at its heart, her story is not about rules or even about a single miracle. It is about love. Pure, childlike, unshaken love for Jesus in the Eucharist. Today, the Eucharist is still celebrated daily in churches across the world. Yet how often do we approach it with routine, with distraction, with hearts divided by the noise of life? Imelda reminds us what it means to hunger for God. She shows us that the Eucharist is not just a ritual, but the living presence of Christ Himself. To her, communion was not ordinary bread, but heaven coming down to earth, and she longed for it with such intensity that heaven could not deny her. This is why the Church holds her up as patroness of First Communicants. For children preparing for their first Holy Communion, her story is both a guide and a challenge. It tells them that holiness is not reserved for adults, monks, or priests. A child can love God so completely that her life becomes a message for the whole world. But her story is not only for children. It speaks to every believer, reminding us that faith must be simple and sincere. Imelda had no complex theology, no years of study. What she had was a heart wide open to God, and that is what made her a saint. In a time when the Church is calling people back to a deeper reverence for the Eucharist, Imelda's witness is more relevant than ever. Her life asks us hard questions. Do I still believe that Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist? Do I approach Him with love and longing, or with indifference? The miracle of Blessed Imelda also reveals something about heaven's tenderness. God chose a little girl, overlooked by rules and tradition, to remind the world that no love goes unnoticed. Her longing was answered not with silence, but with a visible miracle. That miracle was not only for her, but for everyone who would hear her story in the centuries to come. In her, we see a truth that children often understand better than adults, that God is not distant. He is near. He comes to us, humbles Himself to be received in something as small and fragile as bread, and in someone as small and fragile as a child. Blessed Imelda Lambertini's story is not just history. It is an invitation to rediscover the awe of the Eucharist, to hunger for God with childlike trust, and to believe that miracles still happen when love is pure.